Hey Fromville, it's Julie B. Deep Dives, and today I'll be diving into Season 3, Episode 2 of When We Go. I have so much to say about this incredible episode that this will be part 1 of 2. It's not a recap, and I'm not going to proceed in chronological order. Instead, I'll analyze the major events and themes and give you my theories and ideas. After a premiere that started off the season with a huge bang, we got taken on a roller coaster of emotion with this one, as the townspeople dealt with their grief over the loss of Tian Chen. We watched as Kenny essentially went through all the stages of grief in a single episode. We saw Boyd reeling with devastation and guilt due to Tian Chen's passing. We saw Jade rising to the occasion to support Boyd and Christy, while Victor was so triggered that he lashed out at poor Ethan, who struggled to comprehend that this woman who loved him was gone. Now, in part 1 of this breakdown, I'm going to focus on 3 major themes: manipulation of the residents and trying in the effort to try to break them, sacrifice, and games. The episode opened with a much-needed, fleeting moment of ironic humor, as the goats and sheep are literally eating Jade's string theory thought experiment in the bar. But the levity of this moment quickly gave way to the gut-wrenching scene in which Jade finds Tian Chen's body in the barn, with Boyd still cuffed to the post and repeating something in Cantonese to himself. We later find out that he was repeating Tian Chen's last words to himself over and over so that he could relate them to Kenny, which causes Kenny to finally break down completely by the end of the episode after holding in the depth of his grief. He hears that his mother's last words were, "Take care of him, he'll be alone now." But it looks like Kenny won't be alone, because he'll turn to his father figure Boyd once again, as the rift between them seems to be completely gone. But getting back to this scene, what the creatures put Boyd through, in an effort to break him, it's truly a form of manipulation and psychological warfare. Boyd repeated Tian Chen's words over and over to himself because it was literally all he could do for her, as he was restrained by the creatures and forced to watch them rip her apart. They forced him into a state of helplessness to which he's not accustomed. This is evident from the fact that the very instant that Jade releases him from his cuffs, he flings himself at Tian Chen's body, wailing and sobbing. We've never seen Boyd reduced to this level before. The creatures have made it clear that they're stepping up their efforts to break him, and it's working. Boyd is used to being the problem solver, the fixer, Mr. Fish and Loaves. He spent episode 1 of this season putting out fires all over town. But this time, he was utterly powerless to do anything to help this beloved member of the Fromville family. Rendering him powerless to help is an ideal way to try to break his spirit and manipulate him. I also have to point out that when Jade and Boyd wheel Tian Chen's body to the church, Jade wants to know, "How are you still alive?" Boyd tells Jade they wanted him to watch. Again, another aspect of trying to break him. And this is something that could very well sow distrust against Boyd going forward, because no one else has ever been able to survive spending a night with the monsters. Initially, Donna outright blames Boyd for Tian Chen's death, pointing out that their people are their greatest resource, not their food. And Boyd responds, "Are you saying I had a choice?" The fact of the matter is, Boyd did have a choice. He didn't have to continue trying to get that cow into the barn with Tian Chen. When he saw the monsters approaching, given the slow pace of their movement, he probably could have just abandoned the cow and gotten Tian Chen to safety in another building. But in the heat of the moment, he was afraid of starvation, and he made a choice, a snap judgment. Interestingly, the day after Tian Chen's death, Kenny and Jim find a bunch of cabbage and other crops growing by a lake near the cabin village. Why didn't they notice this the day before? I would venture to say that none of this was there before Tian Shen's death. Which brings me to the next theme that keeps coming up in this show that I want to address here: sacrifice. It's now more clear to me than ever that Fromville seems to demand blood sacrifice in return for rewards. Now, ultimately, I believe Fromville requires a total blood sacrifice of everyone in town, perhaps except for a sole survivor child in each cycle, who was Victor in the last one. But in the meantime, it seems as though sacrifice during a cycle manifests rewards. For example, in season 1, Sarah asked Christy if it would be worth doing one bad thing if it meant that she could see her partner Marielle again. Christy said yes, hypothetically. Sarah took that as a green light to listen to voices in her head telling her to try to take Ethan's life. Or so she thought. She accidentally took the life of her brother, though, by mistake. And afterward, Christy felt responsible for this, as if she had given Sarah permission to do it. And interestingly enough, not long after, a bus with Marielle on it miraculously arrived in town. Coincidence? I don't think so. I mean, what are the odds? Knowing that people arrive in this place from different points all over the country, seemingly at random, what would be the odds that of all people to land here, her partner would show up? Someone with a direct connection to her. Of all the people in the country that could have found themselves trapped here in season 2. I just don't see how this can be a coincidence. I definitely think that this is a result of the unintentional sacrifice that was made. Interestingly, in this episode, Christy came face to face with Sarah for the first time since that night that they spent together in season 1, as Sarah came to relay the news about Tian Shen. And Christy even brought up this season 1 incident with Sarah in this episode, talking to Boyd about the guilt that she felt. I don't think it's an accident that the writers suddenly decided to make reference to that incident now. Again, it ties in with the ongoing theme of blood sacrifice bringing rewards, even if it's unintentional sacrifice, as in this case. Another unintentional sacrifice that came with a reward was the sacrifice of Boyd's wife, Abby. While Abby was losing her mind, Boyd was oblivious and kept obsessively exploring the woods, finding reward after reward, starting with the livestock, a goat, some chickens, and more. And most significantly, he ignored Ellis's pleas to take a break from exploring and just stay to look after his mother. Boyd overlooked the decline in his wife's mental health. And by the time he came back with the talismans, Abby had already started her shooting spree, believing that this is the way that everyone could go home, that everyone was just dreaming. Boyd had to shoot her to prevent her from taking the life of their son. And ultimately, the sacrifice of Abby's life was the price that he had to pay for finding the talismans that night. Abby's role was also head of security for the town, so it was a darkly fitting trade. Abby's life for these talismans that provided security. A much higher level of security than Abby could have provided them with. Now in season 3, here we have yet another darkly fitting example of this kind of sacrifice. Boyd saw the livestock, their only remaining food source, let loose in the street, and he made the choice to let Tian Shen stay out there with him to try to save a cow. They didn't manage to save all the livestock, but the next morning, Kenny and Jim found these crops by the newly discovered lake. Jim specifically said there's enough here to feed the entire town. Tian Shen was responsible for feeding the entire town, cooking all of their meals at the diner. So I believe the sacrifice of Tian Shen led to the manifestation of these crops overnight. I mean, if animals can magically appear in the forest, livestock that should never be running loose in a forest, surely crops could magically appear as well. There was even a clue to this manifestation. In episode 1, Tian Shen herself said that they should try planting crops in another location. Let's also remember that the theme of sacrifice was hinted at in Jade's last vision of season 2, the ghoulish kids laying on what looked like sacrificial slabs. I believe that the entity in control of this place feeds on the blood sacrifice of the people who become trapped and perish here. The monsters don't seem to literally eat the people, but the entity in control feeds off their pain and suffering, and ultimately their demise. And it's possible that the sacrifice of children could even be what started this place to begin with. The ghoulish kids wear clothing that looks hundreds of years old, potentially. And this place may be as old as the earliest date in Tabitha's lighthouse dream, 1506. It's possible that these children were literally sacrificed hundreds of years ago. But we'll have to wait and see for more on their backstory. Another theme that is so prevalent in this show that comes up yet again in this episode is raised by Donna: games. Games have been an ever-present theme since the very start of the series, in the first few minutes, with this scene of Kenny and his dad playing chess. Chess is the most frequently referenced game, but there are also playing cards, board games, and various other games that we see people playing at Colony House. After the murder of his father in season 1, Kenny told Boyd that we're running out of spaces on the board, comparing their predicament to a losing game of chess. Now, getting back to season 3, episode 1, recall that Boyd made a speech to the townspeople in which he said, quote, "We're still in this thing. We can still win. And the only way we go home is together," unquote. Now, what does he mean we can still win? Win what exactly? Is this a game? Now, once again, in episode 2, we have a game metaphor brought up with the murder of Kenny's other parent. In episode 2, Donna tells Boyd, quote, "You did the only thing you could do, and you lost, because the game here is rigged, and no matter what hand you play, you lose," unquote. Now let's think about this. What is the deeper meaning here? Are these people literally players in a sort of game? It certainly seems that way. Every time they seem to have a win, it's almost as if they clear a level in a video game and conditions just get harsher. The skill level becomes more challenging. And there seem to be rules to the game here. For instance, the monsters can't enter their homes if they hang up a talisman and keep the doors and windows shut. And certain actions seem to be against the rules, like trying to build a radio tower to communicate with the outside world, which seemed to bring in a storm as retaliation, destroying the tower. Then there was Tabitha digging a hole in her basement, which led to the entire house collapsing in retaliation, filling in the hole and covering the cave mural that it exposed. Even Victor's name is a reference to a game. He was the sole survivor of the previous cycle and is thus the victor, as in victorious. Some popular fan theories have posited that there are at least 2 entities playing a game in Fromville and using the entities as sort of pawns. This theory is looking more and more credible as time goes on. Recall that in season 2, this ghost Khatri vision appeared to Boyd with a chessboard and pointed a pawn at him while convincing him to keep quiet about what Sarah had done. Could there be a more in-your-face reference than this? He, or it, or whatever entity this is, was using Boyd as a pawn, manipulating him, in my opinion. And speaking of manipulation, whatever entity is in control of the jukebox certainly has a dark sense of humor with emotional manipulation, actually taunting Kenny by playing Celebration while he was in the diner mourning his mother. In the past, whatever controls the jukebox has used it to manipulate people. In season 1, when Boyd was looking for a sign from his late wife on whether to go on a trek in the woods, the jukebox played his favorite song, If I Had a Boat, which he took as his sign. But I would venture to say that this was no different than Father Cautry thinking he heard the voice of God on the night when he ended up in Fromville. I believe there is at least one entity, possibly more, that manipulate people to do their bidding. I would argue that an evil entity played him that song because it wanted him to venture into the woods and bring back the cicada entity with him to unleash upon the town. That seemed to be the plan all along. After all, at the end of season 2, Sarah heard a voice in her head and related it to Boyd that it said, "It's laughing at you for bringing it to town." Whatever is controlling this jukebox, it's not on the side of good, in my opinion. The jukebox is the thing that encouraged Boyd to go out there in the first place, after all. And speaking of the cicada entity, another noteworthy moment in this episode, too, comes when Julie confides in Sarah that she feels like this place has gotten into her head after that entity targeted her in season 2, and she's scared of what that might mean. She admits that she's afraid of becoming like Sarah and hurting people. Which begs the question, is it possible that part of the cicada entity could still be inside Julie, Marielle, and Randall and influence them to actually harm people? This evil entity could manipulate Julie by getting into her head now, like the voices in Sarah's head manipulated her. There definitely seem to be after effects going on with these characters, even though the cicada entity seemed to be defeated in season 2. So this will be an ongoing concern this season. Another ongoing problem may be the urge for revenge felt by Kenny and Boyd. I would argue that by seeking revenge, they will be playing right into the hand of the evil entity in control. Once again, here's this theme of manipulation of the residents, circling back to that. This entity in control wants to manipulate them by inflicting grief upon them and terrorizing them, stoking a knee-jerk reaction to fight back in reckless ways that will ultimately backfire. See, it's not just about taking the lives of random people or specific people. It's about terrorizing the survivors as well and trying to break them psychologically. Time and again, Kenny has lost so much, possibly more than anyone else here in town. It's clear to me that this entity is trying to break him to the point where he finally snaps and does something reckless. This is even more true for Boyd, of course, as the monsters have now explicitly said they're trying to break him. So in season 3, episode 2, by the end, Kenny is becoming hell-bent on going into the caves and burning every last monster. And Boyd is ready and willing to go with him. But he ultimately talks Kenny down from this dangerous plan. To be honest, I think Boyd is the one we need to be more concerned about here, though. He seems to want to protect Kenny from doing something reckless, but he later reveals to Ellis that he plans on doing something pretty reckless himself, trying to catch a monster. Personally, I don't see the point in catching a single monster. Trying to burn them while they're asleep in their cave sounds much more effective to me. I would much rather see Boyd be level-headed and work together with Jade, who deals with the loss of Tian Shen in a more rational way. In some touching, heartwarming scenes, Jade helps Christy clean up Tian Shen's body, and he delivers the line I'd been expecting since I first saw the title of this episode. Quote, "You'll come with us when we go," unquote. This is a beautiful callback to Jade's memorable line to Tian Shen about her deceased husband in season 1, that if they escape this place, quote, "He'll come with you when you go," unquote. But then again, Jade wasn't the target of the ambush in episode 1. He wasn't the one who had to go through that experience, pushing him more to his breaking point. Boyd was. The creatures are bent on breaking his spirit and his mind and clearly his judgment is already compromised by his desire for revenge. He won't be able to let this go. Just like he literally held on to the body of Tian Shen, he will hold on to the loss of this beloved woman, and it's going to shape his journey for the rest of the season and beyond. I predict that his plan to catch a monster will go sideways and result in the townspeople losing trust in Boyd's competence to lead them. Now, I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that Tian Shen's demise could have been like a sacrifice that led to the reward of the new crops? Do you think Fromville entities could be playing a kind of game using the residents as pawns? What do you think about Boyd's plan to catch a monster? Let me know what you think in the comments. Keep an eye out for part 2, which I'll hopefully have uploaded by tonight or tomorrow at the latest. And if you liked this video, please hit the thumbs up and consider subscribing. Until next time, keep on deep diving, and let's see what we can uncover together.